Okay, so here we are. We are going to share my screen, and I've got the sample data up. Yeah. And here we are. All right. Okay, so we're looking at version 2023, but 2024 is not that different as far as, um, how do I do a transaction? There's a few changes. But anyway, so we're going to go into the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go through AR setup, and we're going to go through all of these icons. So let's jump in. So the first icon we're going to look at is the AR setup options. So the first tab is the company tab, and if you need to make your screen larger, you can do that on your end, just to remind you. So AR setup options. So the company name and address comes from your company profile, which, just to remind you, is in Common Services company profile. So that's where your company name, your tax ID, all that information is stored. So the modules, accounts receivable, accounts payable, anything you've got, reads that into your company info on the company tab of the setup. And that if you have a separate AR contact, you can put that person's name here as well as their telephone and fax. So, that's pretty much all of that. On the processing tab, this begins to get into the meat of how things work in your system. So on the processing tab, and of course, the functional currency is US dollars because we're single currency, thank goodness. The processing options, the first option is process recurring charges. So when you turn that on, that allows you to set up recurring charges and accounts receivable. By the way, there's a corresponding checkbox in AP as well that does the same
Are-
things. So
Carol, are you recording this?
I am.
Okay, cool.
Yep. So this simply makes it possible to create these recurring items in AR. The next checkbox is force listing of all black boxes. You can see that's not checked. What that would do is it would force you to print to either physical printout or to the preview before you can post. I personally find this seriously annoying, but some people like it. So I think the thought process is that you'll look at it before you post it, but quite honestly, people just print it and go ahead and post it anyway. But anyway, that's what that does. So if in your new company you notice it's making you do that, you just need to come in here and turn that checkbox off. The next checkbox is allow edit of imported batches. So imported batches could come from Excel, or if you had some external program that was pushing into AR, this checkbox option would allow you to make changes to those batches prior to posting. Similarly, allow edit of external batches would allow you to edit batches that came in from other modules. So another module would be order entry, which I don't think you have. Order entry and for selling inventory items. So allow edit of external batches probably isn't going to have any impact on your system. Retainage accounting, that is for the construction industry. The sample data has it turned on, but what retainage does, just for your knowledge, is a lot of times a general contractor, when they bill a subcontractor, the subcontract, or vice versa, when a subcontractor bills a general contractor, they'll hold back 10% until the job is finished, and that turns that feature on. So that's a feature you're not going to want to turn on because it adds fields that you just don't need. Credit checks. So these are just check boxes, include pending transactions. So a pending transaction is a entered but not posted. So typically that would be like a payment that maybe somebody's working on but haven't yet posted. I personally think it's a good option. Allow pending order entry. This would be order entry invoices that have not come into AR yet because a day in process hasn't been done. Again, this doesn't impact you guys because you're not using order entry, but that's what that would do. And then include other pending transactions. So this is just anything that's entered but not posted would play into credit check information. The next section is the customer comments. There are two things you can store for your customers. One is comments, one is notes. Comments are a tab that we'll talk about later. It's in your customer setup screen. And comments can allow you to enter notes and things. You can set an expiry date. You can set a follow-up date, like, follow up in 5 days. It's sort of a very, very, very basic collections type thing. Comments are available in both AP for vendors, AR for customers, and you can use it as a real basic collection. I mean, it's not going to trigger anything like statements or anything like that, but if you have a note there, you can use that, and we'll talk about that later. You can set up comment types in accounts receivable and conversely in accounts payable. We'll talk about those when we a little later in setup. Allow blank comment types. So you can set comment types. One might be collection, one might be sales follow up, or just anything you can imagine. Um, but then this would allow you to enter a comment that didn't apply to any of these types. So you can allow yourself to do that or not. The next section, customer, national account, and group statistics. So statistics, we definitely want to keep those because then at a glance you can see, what have I done this year? How many invoices? How much were the invoices? What's the highest invoice? What's the last payment? All that. That's useful information. Allow edit of statistics. Usually that's not done unless you want to bring in your statistics during a startup of a new company. Honestly, in all my years of doing this, I have yet to see anyone do this, but you can certainly do it. Include tax and statistics. So what that would do, turning that on, would include the sales tax and the invoice total for statistical purposes. So I sold $100, $5 of that was tax. Do I want to have my invoice statistics for the month say $100 or 105? Most people do not check this, and I think you're tax exempt anyway, so probably not doing that. And then how do I want to accumulate my statistics? So fiscal year, are you guys at June 30th? I think you are. Yes. So you can elect to accumulate your statistics by your fiscal year or your calendar year. So it's really going to be what is the best option for when you're looking up year-to-date info, period to date, year to date. Do you want it by your fiscal or by your calendar? I think most people do fiscal, so it corresponds with their year end. But it's not mandatory. Item statistics. So if you've got billing codes, which we would call items, this would allow you to keep those statistics. So like for me, my items might be software that I've sold or hourly time, um, and that sort of thing. So do I want to keep statistics? Yeah, sure. Why not? So, and again, allow edit of those item statistics. And again, allow tax and statistics, and how do I want to accumulate fiscal versus calendar, okay? The last section in the statistics is salesperson. Probably salesperson in the classic way doesn't really apply to you, but you could use it to track something else, even though it's called salesperson. So, maybe manager or, resident manager or, something like that. You could track that. And again, do you want to keep statistics? Do you want to be allowed to edit? Do you want to include tax? How do I want to accumulate? So that's the processing tab. The next tab is the transaction tab. So there's two types of the invoices in accounts receivable. We're going to look at both. One is an item type where you would say I'm selling X number of items at X dollars. For us, it would be X number of hours at a certain rate. And the other option is summary, where it just goes directly to a GL account code with a brief summary, and it's not calculating quantity times price to give you an extended. You're just plopping in a flat amount. So in this area right here, um, this is where you set what is my default invoice type when I create an invoice batch. You can always overwrite that at data entry time, but this is what's going to come up automatically. In Sage 300, you've got two dates that we track. One is document date for posting purposes, and one is GL posting date. So here's where you set the default posting date. So there's three options. Usually people use the document date. So if my invoice is dated May 6th, then my invoice my GL posting date will be May 6th. You can also tell the system that you want to use the batch date instead or the session date. The session date is when you log in and put your user ID and Sage 300 password, and then there's a date, which is usually today. That's your session date, and you can view what is my session date right here at the bottom lower right hand of your Sage 300 desktop. It tells me my session date is 5/6/2024. So that's
Carol,
what that means.
these are just defaults so
Yes,
that you can
yes,
still override it if you need to.
absolutely. Yep. So in the setup is where you establish those defaults, many of which can be overridden at the time of data entry. So, if most of your invoices are item style, you would want to make sure your default invoice type is item style because otherwise you have to change it at every single entry. And that's sort of annoying. So this is where you're setting things for your most of the time things. Calculate tax amounts automatically. If you're tracking sales tax, you would want to turn this on. Um, Detail you're not tracking sales tax, are you? No. Okay, so this is where you would establish your um, sales tax information. Item comment, use item comment as default. So if you've got items set up, there's an item comment, and I'll show you that. And do you want that to populate your invoice automatically? Do I want to show the item cost? Probably for you, it's irrelevant because you're probably not tracking it inside AR. Allow printing of invoices. Well, yeah, I don't know why you wouldn't. And then allow edit of invoice after it's been printed. Well, sometimes you realize you've made a mistake. Do you want to be able to do that? So that's your invoice options. The next option is receipt options. So you've got 5 types of receipts that you can enter in accounts receivable. So this is where you tell the system what is the one you use most often. So for you, I'd say it's going to be receipt. And a receipt is where you've got an invoice and accounts receivable that you're going to now receive cash or check against. So that's the receipt type. Prepayment is where someone sends you money in advance. Unapplied cash would be someone sent you money and you have no idea what it's for, but you need to enter it. So it would be unapplied cash. Apply document is where you either have a prepayment, unapplied cash, or a credit note that you're applying to another document like an invoice. And then miscellaneous receipt is when you're receiving money that is not for an invoice that's been posted in accounts receivable. So that could be, um, a miscellaneous receipt from a customer, or it can be like Verizon sent you a refund, or, something that has nothing to do with AR. But most
So
people,
Carol, like I'm just trying to think in our world, if we get an individual donation,
uh huh.
would that be then a
Yeah, it could be
miscellaneous
a
receipt?
miscellaneous receipt because then you wouldn't have to go into AR, enter an invoice, post the invoice. You would basically be entering the invoice and paying it, or receiving the funds against it at the same time. So you'll get that debit to AR, credit to revenue, debit to cash, credit to AR. So you'll see all of that happening at once. Okay.
And for bank reconciliation purposes, this would be
It would
the
all flow.
best way to go with
Yeah, I
those.
mean, it's really honestly, um, for bank rec purposes, the main thing you want to do is make sure that the total of any receipt batch equals one deposit slip. So for bank rec purposes, if you receive a donation, and it's in the middle of a bunch of other checks that you're depositing today, you're going to want to include that in that AR batch, because the total of the AR receipt batch is what's going to land in the bank rec. Now, if you just
That's
received,
important.
if someone set you up so that they do like an electronic funds, $10 a month kind of thing, then it's not going to show up inside of any one deposit. And then it's kind of six one, half a dozen another. You can enter it in bank rec, or you can enter it in AR as a separate batch. But the main thing is that you want one AR batch to tie to one deposit, because that's what's going to show up on your bank statement as one number, and that's what's going to show up in your AR batch. So that's the main thing. Um, so when you're entering a receipt and you've got a customer with a number of invoices that are due, you've got an option of how you want them to be sorted in your AR receipt batch. So this just sets a default. So you can always resort as you're entering it, but you can have it in order of document number, or due date, or document date. PO number and order number probably doesn't apply to you. I mean, you can use those fields to store other information, but people aren't paying according to a PO for what you guys are doing, I don't think. So I would think logically your options would either be document number, or document date, or due date. You could also sort it by current balance of the item. Shipment number is not going to apply, or original document number. So I think for you, document number, document date are probably going to be what makes the most sense. Default payment code, how do I usually receive my money? So whatever that is what you would set here. Most people still, it's checks. And then what is the bank code, default bank code? What bank do I usually receive my deposits into? As you may remember, each transaction batch will be attached to one and one only bank code. So you can't have a deposit, some of which goes to bank A and the rest of which goes to bank B. It's all one. So this is where you would set your default if you have one that's mostly people just have one where they're receiving deposits. Payments acceptance bank code, I honestly am not, I need to look up and see what that actually means, but usually it would be the same. So I'll look that up and email you. That's kind of a new feature that I haven't really run into very often. Once again, default posting date. So you've got three options here. Document date, which would be, the document date of your deposit, the batch date or session date. So in the case of a receipt option, there are three dates and they should all three be the same. There's the batch date, and that sets the defaults for all your entries. Then once you've added an entry, there's the document date, and then it creates a deposit date. These three all need to be the same, and we'll talk extensively about that tomorrow and what happens if you mess this up and all that. So we'll talk about that Wednesday rather. But anyway, typically it's document date. Include pending transactions. So you definitely want this. So if you've received two checks in one batch from one customer, you want to see that once you enter the first one, you want to see that those invoices that the first one paid are pending, as in that one has already been applied, so you don't apply the same money to the same invoice. Okay, so, and then allow printing of deposit slips. I would turn that on. Create deposit slip when batch is created. Sure. Allow edit after deposit. Probably. Force listing of deposit slips. That means you could not post your batch until the deposit slip was printed. I wouldn't turn that on because, again, it's annoying. Um, and you can always print a deposit slip even after a batch is posted. You can actually print out a deposit slip and it'll list all your transactions, and you can use that. You can turn that into the bank and just put the total on your deposit slips. That's kind of nice. Allow adjustments in receipt batches. So if you've got a customer that doesn't pay the full amount, you can actually create an adjustment right there in your um, in your deposit receipt entry that would write that little bit off. So that just turns that feature on. And then once again, do you want to be able to edit after you've printed a receipt? So I would say yes. The next section is refunds. So you can print checks out of accounts receivable, which is nice. If someone overpays, you can send them a check without having to create a transaction in AP with a clearing account and all of that. So refund options. This is just not a lot of options here, but you can ask the system if you want to check for duplicate check numbers, if you want to pop up a warning or not. And then very similar to the default order of open documents in receipt option, you can set the default order of checks that you're about to print in a batch of AR refund checks. So typically it's by the entry number. So entry one would be first, entry two, but you could sort it by customer number if you wanted. Now, numbering. So, numbering, we talked about how you guys in the past had created a new customer ID when the year turns over so that you can track all that. And then you end up with, a zillion customers, and that's a nightmare. So, what a lot of my clients, myself included, do is at the beginning of the fiscal year, I come in here and I edit my numbering sequence. So I change my prefix to have something like, IN for invoice, and then followed by the year. So for a debit note, it would be IN 2024. Credit note would be IN. And that way you can look at a glance, and it tells you exactly what fiscal year this landed in. It also accumulates your statistics that way, but it also sorts your documents. So all your 23s would show up before your 24s would show up. And then the next number here, some people start their numbers over every year. I just let them roll. Um, but it's totally up to you. So what you would do at the end of your fiscal year, um, unless you wanted to do it by calendar year, so that would be your decision. But you would come in here, and before you post anything for the new fiscal year, you'd update your prefix and the numbering. And that way we could actually write reports in Sage Intelligence to give me all my transactions with the prefix of 2020, or with 2024 in the, so that's another way you can slice and dice
I
all that.
like changing the I like changing the prefix, but keeping the number in sequence.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I'm kind of
you need
weird.
to update that too.
I agree. Yeah. I kind of like to know how many invoices I've done, just since the beginning of time. I don't know. It's just something I like to do. So anyway, yeah, you can just do that. So that's going to be one of your things you do prior to processing in a new year, is come in and update. And by the way, when you do any updates to any of these tabs, you've got to make sure that all users are out of accounts receivable, or you won't be able to save it. So let me just show you what happens there. So I'm just going to open any other function. And then when I pull that back up on my AR options, let's say I'm just going to say PY 2024. When I hit save, it's going to say you cannot change AR options until all users have left AR and you have closed all other AR windows. So that doesn't mean people have to get out of Sage. They just have to close the AR module, because you're editing the AR setup. So if someone's in there, it's kind of like a conflict. And then just to remind you, if you ever do run into this, if you want to know who's in what, you can click on the help, and then you can go to current users and you can see who's in the system. And then if you check this show screens that users have open, you can see that the admin user has the AR options open, and it would tell you even which company you're in. Um, so sometimes you're
That's
doing,
awesome.
yeah, yeah,
So
and that's not a new feature. It's been there for a while. Now, another really cool feature is that, let me show you this one. So if I go into Sage, I'm going to pretend I'm another user. Hopefully this user has some rights. I don't know. We'll see. Actually, I don't even know my password. So if I go in, I can't do this because I don't remember my password for my other users for my sample data. But if I come in here and you realize someone forgot to shut down AR and you need to do something, what you can do is you log in as the admin user, okay?
okay.
And then you look and see who's in, and then you click show screens that users have open. And what happens a lot of times is people just have the Sage desktop open. They're not doing anything. Maybe they went to lunch or something, or maybe they forgot to shut down for the day. Then what you can do is you can uncheck this. You can check this box, and then there's a thing here, sign out selected users, and it will sign out those users that you've selected. And it takes a couple minutes. And then you just kind of watch this screen, hit refresh every now and then, like give it a couple, like 2 minutes. And then you'll see those users are logged out, and that'll allow you to do what you need to do. So,
So Carol, is there
mm,
an option to see if people are not logging out so that you can see that someone's been logged in since, oh,
yesterday or
April?
whatever.
Yeah,
No, I mean, it's just, are they in or not?
okay. I used
But
to do it in Great Plains. I'd check it
okay.
and I'd catch so many people that just never log out.
Yeah.
It would drive me nuts.
Yeah. And of course, best practices is close your accounting system at the end of the day. But anyway, excuse me. So, So that's your numbering. And then you can see just down here, these are not editable, but it just tells me what's my next invoice batch, my next receipt batch, just sort of a by the way, FYI thing. The next tab is statement. So this is where you define your aging periods 131, 1 to 30, 30 to 60, 60 to 90, over 90, or whatever your aging periods are. Um, those are your defaults. Then there's the option, do you want to print zero balance statements? I would think not. And then age, how do I want to age unapplied credit and debit notes? So if you enter a debit note but don't apply it against anything, or a credit note, or a receipt or prepayment, how do I want to age it? So you can either age it by document date, so it shows 36 in this 30, 60, 90 column, or the Sage 300's default is to age them as current. So you would see your credit notes in that first column, and then because that kind of makes sense in a way. But you can do it however you want. It's up to you. And then the last tab is the retainage, and again, this is for construction where you set your retainage percentage and your aging. How do I want to do tax reporting and so on, which you will not have this tab unless you turn on retainage, and once you turn on retainage, you can't turn it off, so don't turn it on. So that is AR setup options. So that's the first thing in a new system you set up. You set up your options because that's going to define how is my system going to behave. Okay. The next thing you set up, of course, the first thing you set up is account or is general ledger, because a lot of this requires GL account numbers, which you can't fill in until you have some, right? So the next thing you would set up are your account sets. So your account sets and accounts receivable, you have to have at least one, but you can have as many as you need. So account sets are a way to slice and dice your customers by account sets. And it's also what the system uses for the other side of all of your entries. So when I enter an invoice, it goes against some revenue code, but the other side will be what? Accounts receivable. So this is where you tell the system what that AR account number is going to be. If you offer discounts, what is that receipt discount going to be? If a customer sends you a prepayment, that's actually a liability because you owe them services of some sort. So prepayment liability is set up here. If you have bad debts, where do I want them written off? What's the bad debt account? Retainage, again, doesn't apply. That would be an asset, but it doesn't apply to you. So in the
So
sample,
Carol,
yeah,
I'm just trying to think of ways that we might be able to utilize this, and I'm thinking um, in terms of like if we have government funding,
yep.
would we want all government funders to have a government funding AR? And then,
You could. It's up to you.
but it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, so then the answer is no. It's like you got the option for all sorts of detail, but the question you have to ask yourself is what would I do with it, and is it going to help me in my reporting? Because at the end of the day, it's all about your reporting, how do I want
Got it.
things to flow? Yeah, so now some people, so in this example, you've got trade accounts receivable, which would be the bulk of their customers for whatever they're in business to do. Um, you've got other accounts receivable, like in this example, if you've got employee loans or something, you might track that there. Um, you might have, like, if you're multi-currency, you might have your USA customers that are US dollars versus your Canada dollars. Those are the kinds of things you would do. But again, it comes down to, is this going to give me something that I wouldn't have otherwise? The answer, of course, is yes. But the next question, is that going to be useful to me? And the answer might
Yeah,
be,
so
not really, you know.
it might be good to have other as
Yeah,
well as our regular
your
AR.
regular. Yeah. So that's something for you to kind of mull over. So once again, the control account set only establishes these GL account numbers. Now, some people have multiple control accounts, but they all flow into the same account number because they don't really care. Oh, I'm getting an echo. That's bad. Because they don't really
Oh,
care um, what the GL piece doesn't matter so much to them, but they might want to slice and dice their customer list. But there's other ways to do that as well, which we're going to talk about. So anyway, that's account sets. You have to have at least one. Billing cycles. So again, you can have as many as you need, but you have to have at least one. Now, this billing cycle, this establishes your remit to address. So when you send an invoice and it's got the remit to address, a lot of people, like if they move and then their invoice is still printing the old remit to, address on it, and they can't figure out why because they've changed their company profile, it's because that's actually here in the billing cycles. So once again, you can have as many as you want, but you have to have at least one. So personally, I don't slice and dice my data in this way, but I do. I just have a daily billing cycle because I bill when I bill, whatever that means. But again, this is where your remit to address is stored. So that's important. Now, you could use this if you had like a lockbox where some of your customers send money versus some of them send to your office. Then you might have two billing cycles in that kind of example because your remit to address will be different based on, some other criteria. So that's your AR billing cycle. Distribution codes are optional, not required. What distribution codes do is they link a certain alphanumeric code that you make up to a GL code. So if you get things from department, DDA, a lot of my clients get a lot of money from DDA for Department of Disability or something like that. You might have a DDA billing code or something like that. Um, but anyway, they're optional. You don't have to use them. Um, so it's up to you. But if you do use them, you give it a description, you put in your revenue code. Now, for you, you're not tracking inventory and cost of goods sold in AR. So for your situation as well as mine, they're all three account numbers are the same, because I'm not really pulling costs. So that's
would you
distribution.
use this if you're trying to make sure a certain type of revenue always goes to the same account?
You can. You can. Yeah, you'll see that when we enter transactions. So let's just make one up. I'm just going to do SS, social, uh, I guess Social Security probably sends you some money. And we'll just make up something here. Okay, so what I've done is I've just linked SS to this revenue code. Okay, whatever that would be. So that's an example. Maybe R&B, so room and board. Do you guys have residential services?
We do.
Yeah,
I thought you
that
did.
would be a good one. Hmm.
And then you'll, whatever account number that is, which is totally not what you would do. I mean, sales returns and allowances, we wouldn't use that. But anyway, we're just making stuff up here, so it doesn't matter. Rental income, different sales revenue. So they're just basically they're shortcut codes that you can use to facilitate speedy data entry. And we'll see that when we do transactions. The next one is our dunning messages. So these are going to show up when you print statements. So you've got, different dunning. You can have as many as you want. The default one, and then this is linked to your aging period. So if your client is current, your dunning message would be thank you for keeping your account current. Please pay, 1 to 30, please pay, payment overdue. So you can set those up um, so that the appropriate message does print out on statements, you know. Interest profiles, if you are charging interest, once again, you have to have one, even if it's zero, because it's just one of those required fields. But if you are charging interest, you can do that. So we can create one called zero. Whoop. And interest income. I think that, now let's find an account that's legitimate here in the sample data. So we'll just pick any account, it doesn't matter. How do I want to calculate my interest? By document or by balance? Charge interest once accounts are X number days overdue, so maybe 30. Do I want to round up to a minimum? Of course, with zero, we're not going to be charging interest. Do I want to compound interest on the interest? And what's my annual rate? So this is where you would set that up. All right, so if we look at some of the other examples in the sample data, we've got 5 days overdue, calculate by document, no compounding or rounding, minimum interest charge is $1. So if, it calculates 85 cents, they're going to get $1. And then what is my annual rate? So that's how you would do that if you're using it. The next one is our payment codes. How do I receive payments? So you've got multiple options here. So in the sample data, you've got check, which is probably going to be still your most frequent one. Cash, credit card, wire transfer. So this is just a definition that you're setting up. So if you get ACH payments from customers, you can set that up. What is my payment type? It's cash because, it's coming in as cash. And then I will just save that. So you can have as many as you want. Salesperson, again, you're not, probably you don't have people out selling your services because you're a not-for-profit, but you might use this for another reason. If you want to track, sales by or slice and dice your customer list by some other manner, you would enter your salesperson codes here. Commissions, probably not. The commission system in Sage 300 is super basic. And then statistics by salesperson. So again, you can use it to track something else if you want, like resident manager or just something else you want to store for your clients is set up here. Terms, you probably know about terms, but Sage 300 terms are about as flexible as you can get. So if you can imagine it, you can probably set it up here. So the standard terms are things like 2% paid in 10 days, net 30. So looking at this one, what is my due date type? My due date is days from invoice type, or date rather. So, and then what is my discount count type? Once again, days from invoice date. So then once you select that, you tell the system how many payments is this going to be, how many number of days for the due date, so 30 days, for this example, what is my discount percentage, if any? And if they get a discount, how many days do they have to receive that discount? So that's 2% net 30. COD would simply be due upon receipt. So one payment, 100% due in 0 days. So it's due immediately. You can also have these weird due tables, which honestly I've never seen anyone use, but if you need them, you can. So payment number, single payment, 100% is due. So if the invoice date is between 1 and 10, it's due on the 15th. If your invoice date is between 11 and 20, it's due on the 25th. If it's between the 21st and 31st, it's due the next month, hence the one here on the 5th. So it's pretty cool, but I haven't seen anyone use it. But if you do need it, it's there. Net 30, pretty standard. 100% is due in 30 days. Um, if you have a
Do we need to use it at all?
you have to have terms, yes. So you would
Okay.
have to have at least one terms, whatever that is. You can also let people pay in multiple days. And by the way, this is the exact same feature and the way it's done as in accounts payable. So all of these terms that are available in AR are also available in AP. So just file that away because, you know, you have no control over what your vendor's terms are. They are, every vendor, has their own terms. So typically it's net 30. So anyway, you can set up multiple payments if you have it and it'll age appropriately. So what are your terms? Are your invoices due upon receipt or in 30 days?
Well, that's kind of a tricky situation. Well, not tricky. Like if we would send out like a private pay invoice, it would be kind of a due upon receipt. But when we're talking about when we submit billing to the state, they set their own terms. We don't get to determine what
Yeah,
that
so
is.
is
So
it
they're
more
like
like 90 or 60 or what?
yeah, they're like they pay us within about 3 weeks.
Okay, so that net 30 would probably be appropriate for them or net 21, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, set whatever's appropriate, because this dictates what your due date's going to be on your invoice, which dictates how it's going to age. So it is important. You want to make sure you choose the way you want it to be. So that's terms. So items, this is where you set up items that you can then use in billing. Um, so in the sample data, they're selling office supplies, which doesn't really apply. But so if we were to bill your room and board, so room and board, actually, that would probably be more of a summary invoice, but we'll do it anyway. I'll show you so I can show you both ways. So room and board, that's my description. And then my distribution code is also going to be RB. So that's where that comes in, and see how that populates my GL account number. Now, if you don't use a distribution code, then you can see that account numbers become not dimmed. But when I use a distribution code, that's set by the distribution code. So these are dimmed. So that's my description. Is it discountable? Do I have a comment? You have to fill in the pricing tab. So what's my unit of measure? Probably, I don't know, maybe week or month or something like. Well, I'm just going to say week just for the purposes of demo. I'm not going to put in a cost, but I am going to put in, I'm just going to say $100. And then tax status, we have to have a tax authority. Um, you have to have it whether you use it or not. So in your case, your tax status is going to be whatever your state is, and it's going to be non-taxable. because of what you do. It's non-taxable, but you have to have it set up. So that's how that works. And then, of course, your statistics, your item statistics are accumulated. Remember, we set that up in our company setup options, whether we were going to accumulate stats by item. So we're going to do that. Why wouldn't you? And that's how you set up items. So basically, they save you typing. That's basically what they're doing. There's shortcuts. Like for me, my item codes or my measurement is hourly for my time, and my descriptions would be professional services with a colon. And then when I enter my invoice, I put in the date and then I put in some description, obviously, of what I did that day for someone. So that's how that works. So that's items. Comment types. Remember, we talked about comment types in AR customers. So you've got collection. So that's a very common comment type. Notes, just notes about the customer. So those are just some examples of how you can parse out your comments. They're optional. Email messages. If you email invoices and statements, you're going to want to set up what you want your email to say. So that's where you would set that up here. There are a few fields that can read from the invoice. You can see that they have that little $ in front. So it would say, company name, invoice, so excess services invoice, and then a little letter, and then, the information that you would send on your email. You can set emails for different things, for statements, if you want to send them an emailed receipt, if you want to send them a letter to all your customers, for some reason you could, you can do that. So this is where you would set up your email. Your email settings, you would need your IT people to help you with this, but that again is in your common services company profile on the email tab. So this is where your IT would help you with the server name, the username, the from. You would probably maybe do a CC to whoever's doing the billing. That's where you would set that up so you can email invoices.
Is that the same type of, once it's set up there, that's just for AR? Are there other places where we can email things?
You can email vendor letters. So AR invoices and AR statements and customer letters. You can do vendor letters if you want, like say you were moving or you needed something, you could send that up. It's not something people usually do, but you can. You can send emails to vendors. It's very
Okay.
basic because it's kind of not a common application. But anyway, that's where you would do that. Optional fields. An optional field is just what it sounds like. It's a thing that's not required, but you can create. So when you think about optional fields, the optional fields are the solution to that question that people get. There's a piece of data that I need to put into my system, but there's no field available for it. So you can attach optional fields to customers, national accounts, and customer groups. You can ship to locations, which probably isn't really relevant for you. You can store an optional field on an invoice header or detail, receipts, adjustments, and refunds. So this is just a place where you can store other data that pertains to you that isn't in the vanilla system. So, you might set up an optional field called emergency contact or something like that. You can actually do that in AR, so that's not really a great example. But yeah, just anything that you want to store in your system that isn't available. There's not a field available. You can create these optional fields and attach them to vendors, customers, transactions, etc. So that's where you would set up or attach an optional field to an AR thing, be it a transaction. This part is really important. GL integration. How do I want to integrate my AR to my GL? So the first screen shows you the source codes, ARIN. So when you look at a GL transaction, you can see immediately that it was from accounts receivable and it was an invoice, or it was from accounts receivable, it was a credit note, and so on. The next section is create GL transactions. How? How do I want to do it? During posting or on request. So on request is where you would accumulate transactions throughout a time period, and then the on request you would click on that under periodic process and send those transactions to GL. I don't know why you would do this. That's how you used to have to do it in the DOS program. Some people like it, but I personally like it to go right to GL. The next option is how do I want to create? Personally, I like creating and posting, but you can also add to an existing batch. So if you post something in AR and you've got a batch sitting in GL, you can add to it. What I don't like about that is then you don't have that one-to-one relationship between your AR batch and this corresponding batch in the GL. And if you have to look for something, it can be a little trickier. The other option is creating a new batch, but my favorite option is creating and posting. So every time I post an AR, I immediately post right to the GL. There's no reason not to do this because you really shouldn't be editing a batch that comes from a subledger. If the wrong GL revenue account was used, you can always use a journal entry to take it out of revenue A and put it into revenue B. And that way your AR and your GL are always in sync. And that way you can't accidentally delete an AR batch and then wonder why your AR and your GL don't tie. Consolidation, don't do it, because as soon as you start consolidating, you lose your drill down. So you can't look at an AR transaction in the GL and drill all the way down to the original entry in AR. Consolidation, it does give you a shorter GL, but then you can't really do much with it. So I hate consolidation personally, because it really makes your audit trail tricky. Consolidation was important back in the day when you had a 20 megabyte hard drive and you needed to consolidate, or you'd run out of space at the end of the year. And I was around at that time, so I remember those days and I don't miss them. So you don't need to consolidate. Now this is really important. So this screen dictates what's going to land in the GL from accounts receivable. So you want to set this up at inception. So there are two components to every entry in Sage. There's a header and there's a detail. The header is like your invoice number, your date, your posting date. Maybe you've got a reference or a PO that you're using. That's your header. And then you've got your detail. So your detail is the grid, and you can have multiple lines of detail, but you only ever have one header. So what this is doing is it's dictating what is going to your GL header and detail. And so there's two pieces. So in an AR transaction, there's your detail, and then there's the control account side. So the control account side is what's shown on the header here. So you've got invoice detail. That's what's going to hit your revenue account. So in this example, in your detail reference, it's customer number and customer name. And then in your GL detail description for the revenue side, it's document type, document number. But you also want to control what hits that AR control account. So that's going to be the invoice line or the debit note line and the credit note line versus the detail lines. So once again, my recommendation is to make these consistent so that whether it's the AR control account or your revenue account, it's always the customer number and the customer name if that's what you want, and then the document type and the document number or whatever you want. To edit this, you double click and then you can see all your options: batch number, batch type, customer type, document number, entry number, and so on. You can have multiple things go into here. So you can see in this example, you've got customer number, customer name, and it's separated by a hyphen. So unfortunately, when you first create a new data set, these are not consistent. So you're going to want to set that up because when you set this up, any transaction set or anything that you post from that day forward is going to conform to whatever you set up in here. So you want to get that set up the way you want it at the outset. Once again, just like the AR setup options, if there's another user in the AR, you cannot save these changes. So that's another one where you'd have to make sure all users were out of AR.
Carol, I have a question.
Yep.
So we're planning to go live with our new system July 1st. So in my mind, when it comes to AR, when we're done posting any cash that was received in June, then those AR balances, then we could go forth and set up the customers with those balances.
Right.
Now, I guess there could be adjustments that we make because we're going to finish out the year. So we'll
Yeah.
have to make the adjustments in both systems.
You could, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So what you're going to do is you're going to get as close as you can to the finish. We'll have your AR customers set up. We'll have this GL integration. We'll have all the things we've talked about today set up. Then you'll enter your opening balances at the end of the year as an AR batch. And if you want, I can help you import that if it's a really large number. And then you'll move forward with that. And then any adjustments or tidying you have to do, you would do that in both systems. And then are the customer numbers going to be different, or are you using the same customer IDs? Have you decided?
We don't really have customer numbers, they're GL account numbers.
Okay.
Yeah, this will be totally fresh and
Oh,
new.
it's brand new. Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, we'll talk. We'll get together when we create your data set, and we'll make sure all these settings are the way you want them before we go live, obviously. So that's everything you wanted to know about AR setup. The next section we're going to talk about today, and that's going to wrap us up, are these options here in AR customers. Okay. So just like AR account sets, we have customer groups, and that's a way to organize your customers. You have to have at least one, but you can have as many as you want. So what customer groups do is they establish more defaults for your customers. They also give you a way to group your customers. So your private customers might be in one customer group. Your, government payment customers might be in another customer group if you needed to slice them and dice them that way. So you set up a customer group. Let's see. So we'll just make one up. So we're just going to go call it private, private clients. So you establish your account type, open item. Don't do balance forward because that's a nightmare. balance forward is like your credit card, where it shows what your balance was last month and then all your transactions for this month. And it can get very messy. So I recommend open items. Do I want to print statements for this customer group? Probably. What is my account set? So remember, we set up some account sets. So if you only have one, that's going to be the same. Terms, let's see, net 30, I think was a real one, maybe not. What is our account group? N30, okay. Billing cycle, remember we set that up and set up. We'll just make one up here. Interest profile, if you're not doing the interest, you would make it a 0. That's on the group. So this is setting up defaults that when you add a customer and you choose a group, these defaults are going to populate. Of course, at the customer level, they can be overridden. Credit, do I want to have a credit check? Do I want to set a credit limit? Do I or not? You don't have to. Um, that's the credit tab. Invoicing tab, you have to give it a tax authority. So for you, it'll probably be something like no tax or something like that. What state are you guys in again? Are you Pennsylvania? Yeah.
Pennsylvania.
Yep.
So you might just call it PA non-taxable or something like that. So that's where you would set that up. If you do want to track salespersons or something like that, you can. You don't have to. This is where these optional fields come in. Do I want to use them? If you have them set up, obviously, if you don't have them set up, this will all be blank. And then you simply add. So again, this is where you would set up your customer groups. So that's the first thing you have to do before you can pull in your customers. You probably don't have national accounts, but what a national account allows you to do is if you have multiple customers that kind of fall under the same national account umbrella, then when you receive a check, maybe it comes from one place and you apply it to all those customers, and you want to see that when you do your customer receipts. That's where it's a separate module and it's an extra annual fee. But so if you think about if you were a retail group and you had, let's just say Walmart, just for example, and say you sell to a bunch of Walmarts, but then you get one and you need to track those customers, maybe one in Exton, one in Philadelphia, or something like that. You want to track them separately, but you get one big check that covers all those Walmarts. National accounts allows you to group those customers together so that when you pay for a national account, you'd see your Exton customer outstanding invoices, your Philadelphia outstanding invoices, your Reading, whatever. This probably doesn't apply to you, but if it does, like maybe Social Security sends one check and it's for a whole bunch of customers and you want to show it at the same time, it might be worth having. So, but this is where you would set up those national accounts. And I'll just show you an example. So it looks very much like a customer, but it's actually a national account. And then you would assign different customers to that national account. So that's what that is. The next thing you do once you've set up your customer groups and if applicable your national accounts and you've got everything set up, terms and whatnot, you create your client numbers. So depending on how you want to set up your customers, a lot of people use like an alphanumeric for a name. Let's pick on Jim Campbell. We'll use his name. So maybe he's going to be CAM01, Jim Campbell. And is he in a national account? If not, you leave that blank. Is there a customer group? Oh, there has to be a customer group. He's going to be a private pay customer. Actually, it's PRI. and then wherever his address is. I can't remember where he is exactly, but it's in Exton, PA, and then whatever your zip is. So this is your customer address. Then your contact. So this will be your main contact. And 484-713-1000 is his phone number. J. Campbell at adssglobal.net. And then you can have multiple contacts. So in a multiple contact is additional people that you need to contact for a given customer. So for you guys, it might be responsible party or something like that. So you can create a new contact, and maybe it's going to be CAM01RP or something like that for responsible party. And Jim's responsible party is going to be his wife, right? So that's going to be Diane. And then that's
So
her.
I just want to say something, Bobby. This would be helpful for our funders instead of everyone having their own list, to have it here so that everyone can see who's associated for what to each funder.
You could do that because you can have,
Right.
you
I
can
think I
have
just need to see this at like
an
in a
action.
more live situation because I'm trying to understand how
Yeah, you'll see it in a minute
we
when I get to
connect all the dots.
Yeah, so what this does is it allows you to send send things to this additional contact. So maybe your resident is going to be the person, but maybe invoices go to the mother, or or something like that. Um, it's an optional thing. So if you need to send invoices to multiple persons, you can. So it's, and by the way, multiple contacts, that's also available in AP. So you can have multiple contacts for your vendors as well. So I'm just gonna add that multiple contact, and then, oh, let me enter that actually. Let me go back in here. You want to click, if it's for billing purposes and you want to email, you want to click contact consents to receive emails, because then that's going to allow us to send invoices and statements to that contact. All right. And then what do you want to do? You'd put in the email for the contact, and then you would say, let's see, oh, I need to put in an email address. So let's make one up. Let's see, email at my company. All right, so that gives me something in that field. And then once you've done that, is you can say, I want to send invoices, receipts, and statements to that multiple contact. And this is for order entry. These other items, that doesn't apply to you guys because you don't have order entry. And then add. And then here, the next tab, the processing tab, this all pulls from a combination of their account set and their customer groups. So all these defaults were set when I assigned them to the private clients customer group. So the account type is open item, the account set is trade, terms is net 30. You can override it by a customer. Billing cycle is weekly, zero interest profile. And then how do I get paid by this customer? We'll say check. And then what is my delivery method? So delivery method is, how do I send invoices and statements? So by mail, which means you physically print it, stick it in an envelope and send it. By email, customer email, which would be this email address here on the address tab. Okay. The next option is contact email, which is the email on the contact tab. okay, or multiple contacts. So that's where this multiple contacts comes in. So multiple contacts is handy if you need to send an invoice or a statement to more than one person. So when when I invoice the Philadelphia ADSS Global office, I send it to Jim so he can, review it and make sure everything looks okay. And I also send it to the person who enters their invoices so they can start billing their clients, who I'm helping. So, it just depends. You might email to the customer, to the contact, or to the multiple contacts. So that's your delivery method. Okay. What is my check language? It's going to be English. Um, credit bureau info is probably not going to apply. And then invoicing tab. So these fields up here are really for if you were using order entry, but you can also use them in other ways to store other information if you want. So customer type, base versus A, B, C, D, or E, that would establish your discount types in order entry. But you can also use them to just slice and dice your customers. So if you want to say A customers are always private, and again, it would be if you needed to distinguish customers in some way that for reporting purposes. I think the customer group is probably sufficient, but that's what these are. Again, additional fields. Allow partial shipments. You're not shipping, so you're not doing back orders because you're not using or order entry. So these fields really aren't going to apply. Duplicate POs, probably not applicable in salesperson code. If you're using it, you would set that up here. Once again, the none and the tax group that flowed in from the customer group, but you can override it there. Obviously, no retainage because we're not a construction company. If you were tracking optional fields, they would be populated here. Your statistics just to view are accumulated and can be, are visible on this tab. Your activity again is visible on this tab. Comments, this is where you would enter your comments. Comments can be for anything. And comments, like collection or just any kind of additional information you want on your customer. If you are taking credit card payments, you would enter that information here. Okay, so that's customer information. And that's it for customers. The next thing,
Carol,
yeah,
I just want to confirm our next meeting's on Wednesday.
yeah.
Okay. Just wanted to check because I have a meeting in a few minutes.
Right, I know you're done. We're getting close because this is
Okay.
really it. Customer inquiry. This is where you look things up by customer. This is where I spend a lot of time. A lot of people will print out an aging. I personally like this screen because I can find more info here. So, you can view your documents. By default, it only shows outstanding documents, things that have a current balance. So in this invoice, I've got my original amount was $974. I've applied $921, leaving me a balance of $52. From this screen, if I double click on the document type, it'll open up the original entry. So I can see, yes, this is the revenue account that used, this is all that information. I can look down here and see 2 checks were applied here, okay? One in March and one in April, leaving me with this balance. So it gives me a lot of info. You can also look at my receipts, all my payments. Once again, I can click here and I can see here's where I entered my document, my payment. Refunds, this shows any refunds you sent to your customer, any adjustments. Pending transactions are here. Once again, a pending transaction is entered but not posted. All of these OE tabs and IC will not show up because you don't have those products. The customer profile, again, this is the info we entered when we added our customer, their address, tax and salesperson, credit status, any outstanding comments, so any optional fields, recurring charges that we've set up. So that's a really great screen that I would get very accustomed to. The customer list item or icon is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It just gives you a customer list, you know, um, on screen. Ship to locations probably don't apply to you. Recurring charges, and that's the last thing we're going to talk about today. So the first thing you have to do with a recurring charge is set up a schedule. So the difference between a manually entered AR invoice and a recurring charge is an AR invoice has an invoice date and a posting date. An AR recurring has a schedule and a start date. So, so in AR, a lot of people do billing on the first. So the schedule code would be M1, monthly on the first. You can set up reminders to remind people to do this. When does the schedule start? What is my frequency? It's monthly on the every 1 month. If it were quarterly, it could be every 3 months. What day of the month first, any day, or last. So these schedules, I make them very generic in my naming because I can use these in AP, I can use them in AR, I can use them in GL. So monthly on the first. So setting up a recurring is done in AR invoicing, or sorry, AR customers. So here's an example. So you give it a code. So it might be RB for room and board, and then your description will be room and board. You enter your customer number. You attach your schedule code to it. You tell the system when is it going to start. So in this example, it started on the 1st of January in 2019. Does it have an expiration date? And in this example, it did. Or you can say no expiration. What is the account set? This comes from the customer profile. You can do some sort of description. And then here is where you would enter your revenue and your distribution and then your amount. And then you can look here and see your totals. Okay. So this is where you would set up all your recurrings. And then tomorrow or on Wednesday, when we talk about transactions, you would go into periodic processing and you would run these. Now on the recurring charge, they're very smart. So you have to realize that it knows when your last recurring charge is generated. So if you run a recurring charge and you forgot to change it, what you would do is you would go into that recurring charge batch and you would edit it, because if you delete it, you can't regenerate it because the system knows it's been generated. You can't regenerate it in a batch. You'd have to do it one by one. So once again, the difference between a recurring charge and a regularly entered invoice is that you have a start date, you have a schedule, you have a next invoice date, you have a last date generated if it's been run in the past, you have an expiration, and then it creates your invoice. And once it's created, it's just like any manually entered invoice. So that's how that works. And by the way, the same thing goes for AP, which we're going to talk about now pretty much, because I know you have to scoot.
Yeah, I've got to run. You can finish up, but I've got to take this next meeting.
Yeah, so you'll have a tape or you'll have the
Okay,
recording available.
thank you.
Yeah, so we'll
Okay,
kind of dive into this a little more, and I'll see you on Wednesday.
sounds good. Thank you.
Have a great day.
You too.
So, Bobby, I kind of rushed through that for Lisa's benefit since she had to run. So, what we'll do is we'll go through this again for AP because it's really the same process. Of course, with AR, it's revenue with AP. So, we'll just create one in AR for room and board, just so you can see how I would create it. So, once again, the first thing that has to be created is your monthly or your schedule, whether it's monthly. So we'll look at this one. M1 is an example. Okay, monthly on the first. I think we've got an M last. So that's monthly on the last day, and you use the last because then it'll adjust whether it's the 28th or the 29th, or the 30th or the 31st, depending on what month and if it's a leap year. So those are your options. You can set up as many schedules as you want. So that's how that works. So the first thing you have to do is set up a schedule. And obviously you have to have your customer set up. So I'm going to just call it RB, and you can use the same recurring code for multiple customers. So if you've got a whole lot of customers you charge room and board, you would use that RB, and then you could run all your room and boards, at once if you wanted. So customer, we're going to use the one we created, Jim Campbell. Schedule code is going to be monthly on the 1st. It's going to start on May 1st, 24. Okay. It's not inactive. I'm not going to give it an expiration date. And then this is pulling from the customer trade accounts receivable. I can put a description in the header. I'm going to put a description up here too. Okay. I'll copy that. That's going to show up in the header of your invoice. And then we can create, I think we created an item for room and board. We did. So unit of measure, we'll say it's weekly. I don't know. I'm making stuff up here, but we can just say we're going to charge for 4 weeks. That's going to be $400. Probably for you, it would just be monthly, a single amount. 375 seems to be a typical one, at least in Maryland, for room and board. If you have optional fields, you can fill them out here. You can see there's no sales tax, and then I'm going to just add that. So we're getting into what we're going to cover on Wednesday, but just to kind of close the loop on recurrings, then you would go into accounts receivable under periodic processing. You're going to create your recurring charge batch. So what is my run date? It's today. I want to just do all my room and boards only. So if I had 20 customers set up that get this RB, I would get all of them. My method, how do I want to do this? Either default, create a new batch. I kind of like create a new batch personally. And then I'm going to hit process. So actually, let me show you what would happen if I do 0401. I'm going to go back. It's saying no invoices are generated. And the reason for that is my start date is 5/1. So I'm going to go 0501. I'm going to hit process. So I've got one invoice and it's in batch 68. So now if I go to AR transactions, you can see I've got a recurring charge batch here, recurring charges. So it shows me. And so right now we've got this RC 2024. Remember, we set those numbers up in the beginning with our year. And then on my description, it said room and board. Here's my amount. Everything is the same. Now, if I made a mistake and it should have been $110, I would just change it here. And then I'd go to my recurring charge setup and I'd change it there. Because if I delete this and try to run the periodic processing again, what's going to happen? So I'm going to say, oh, I made a mistake. Let me delete that. I'm going to run it again for 5/1 for RB. And I hit process. It's going to say no invoices are generated. Now, the reason it didn't generate an invoice is because the system knows the invoice was already generated. So I'm going to go back to my customer. I'm going to go back to my RB for CAM01. And you can see last generated 5/1/2024. Now I can generate it again, but I would have to do by clicking create invoice, and I'd have to be really careful. I wouldn't want to do next scheduled because that's 6/1, but I might say other, and then I could recreate that. But the problem with that is if you went and deleted it, then updated all your recurring charges, you have to do this for every single one. So, that's a lot of work. So I wouldn't, do it. So, the main thing you want to do before you run your recurring charges is just make sure they're up to date, the amounts haven't changed. Then you do your periodic processing, then you run them out, and then you can print out your invoices. So let's talk about the same thing in AP. So it's the exact same process. So once again, you want to make sure you've got the schedule. Let's say it's your rent, or let's say it's, I don't know, a lease payment or car, or I don't know, something like that. Car, auto, or actually I don't want to use that. I want to go M15. It's something that's due on the 15th. So I'm going to not use, because I like to be as generic as possible. So I have, people that say they create one for depreciation and they call it DEP and it's monthly on the last. And then, they got other things. And then you end up with all these schedules when you only needed one. So this is going to be monthly. It's going to be on the 15th. Whoops, sorry, every 1 month on the 15th. And I'm going to add that. So I make sure I have the schedule. So that's the first thing. Do I have a schedule that fits for what I need? And then I go into AP. I go into AP vendors and I go to recurring and I'm going to set up my vendor. So I'm just going to say, I don't know, electric, I don't know. Let's say phone. That's a good one. So we'll pretend that this is like Verizon or AT&T or something like that. There we go. So Verizon monthly bill, say it's always the same. My invoice date is the 15th, starting on the 15th. I'm not expiring. So that's cell phones. I don't know, something like that. I'm not using a distribution set. I'm going to use, let's just say, cell phones. And then the phone expense, I'll find one that has telephone. Perfect. And it's $750 just for this. And then we're going to hit add. So now I've got my monthly cell phone bill. And so then when I'm ready to run that, once again, just like AR, I go to periodic process and I create recurring payables batch. And today's date's fine. And I'm going to go phone to phone process. Did I do? Oh, I didn't. I typed that wrong. No invoices were generated. So what? Oh, because it's monthly on the 15th. So I actually have to put the 15th in. That's why no invoices were processed. So now I'm going to get one. And then once I have that, it's just like any other invoice batch where I can come in and view it. There's my $750 invoice, and there it is. So it's available to be posted and paid. So that's how recurrings work the same way, whether it's an AR or AP. It's kind of just one's an expense and one's a revenue. So,
Okay, that all makes sense.
yep. All right. So do you have any other
Perfect.
questions before we sign off?
Not for today, but thank you.
You're welcome. I will get this up on YouTube and send you guys a link. And
Awesome.
we will chat on Wednesday morning.
Yes, ma'am. I appreciate it. Thank you.
My pleasure. You have a great week or
You
couple
too.
weeks.
I'll see you Wednesday.
Yep, bye-bye.
Bye.